Okay, well, hello and welcome to another one of these fantastic live streams with Nobody Studios. These are sets of sessions that we've been running over the last number of weeks to give people a chance to understand what's it actually like to work inside Nobody. And it's been fantastic to have all the various different people that we work with in the studio come and share everything from the Idea Lab, chances to see what we're doing with crowdfunding, actually chances you'll get to meet some of the crowdfunders in the next couple of weeks. But today I'm joined by another nobody who I'm fantastic to have on the show is Donald Farmer, who's our head of research and innovation at Nobody Studios. So Donald, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much, Barry. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite people to spend time with and debate ideas with in the company is definitely you. I think, especially even when I started in the studio, I think my initial call was with you and Mark when he was hanging out in the garage and you were hanging out in
Oh,
the
yeah.
treehouse that you have at home, and we got to start talking about ideas and how to bring the studio to life in Nobody Studio. So for folks that don't know you, you've a fantastic, really interesting and diverse background. Can you share a little bit about your own journey through product innovation, building systems, data, and also your arrival here at Nobody Studios?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a fairly complicated background, my so-called career, Um, I mean, I do a lot of advising and mentoring now, which is good. Previously, I was at a company called Qlik, which was a kind of Swedish company or an American company with a Swedish background doing analytics software. I was at Microsoft for 10 years. Before that, I did all sorts of things, worked in fish farming and forestry, archaeological excavation and research. Um, the one thread that runs through it all is that I've always been really focused on data analysis, data analytics, and then also on productization. I'm really interested in this concept of not just solving a problem once, like here's an interesting project, let's solve it. But how do I solve a problem at scale? How do I solve a problem for everybody who's got that problem? How do I build a product or a service or an application that can generically understand and solve problems? So I'm kind of fascinated by that. And I'm also really interested in innovation as a concept. How do people come up with new ideas? What does it mean to have a new idea? Where does that come from? How do you then make it real? And I've worked with innovation accelerators and um, all over the world. And a result of that is I get to work on all sorts of strange things. I've worked with family restaurants in the Philippines, great fun, 7-Elevens in Thailand, a fashion incubator in Singapore, which you can see, well, you can't see me, I'm on screen, but that's the last thing you would think I'd be part of. Doing everything from maternity wear to high-end handbags to dry shampoos, fascinating. But I love this stuff. I love, digging into what does it mean to create a product? What does it mean to have a new concept and take it to market? It's a really important part of my work.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, right? And I think one of the things we hear, like Min has obviously been running a fantastic show around the Idea Lab. Kiara is going to be starting to share more ideas about where they come from. But I think one of the things that's fascinating to talk to you a little bit about is this idea of ideas and venturing, if you will, and the purpose of them. Because in the research and innovation part of the business, which you're really responsible for, it's looking a lot about technology trends. And this passion of yours is to actually how to apply technology to real problems to make them meaningful
Mm.
rather than just technology for technology's sake. So can you share a little bit about your inspiration and vision really for that part of Nobody Studios about how research and innovation are actually going to come together to feed ideas that we're going to need in the studio?
Really important. Yeah, it's just so important. And I've worked in startups. I mean, although I've been at big companies, public companies, and so on. I've worked in a lot of startups as well, and I've helped a lot of startups. And one of the things that really frustrates me about the world of venture just now, and venture is in some ways a very successful process. Venture capital has been a very successful process, so we shouldn't deny that. But it relies on people having a great idea, coming along to a venture fund or even an incubator or accelerator with their great idea, having that idea acknowledged, and I've been given money, sometimes been given resources, sometimes been given office space, depending on whether it's a fund or an incubator or an accelerator, and then almost immediately turning them into business people, no longer into ideas people. I've got a great idea. Okay, now we're going to turn you into a business person. You're going to be CEO, you're going to raise money, and that's going to be your life from now on, not being an ideas person, not being a product person. And the other thing is you have to go with the idea pretty much complete with your business model, with your business plan, with a complete understanding of that idea and its significance, and persuade other people of it. That's okay. I see it's worked pretty well, but it leaves a whole lot of people on the sideline who've got the kernel of an idea, who've got a passion in an area and know that they can make something of it, but can't build that business model, can't maybe not even productize it. They can't do all those business processes that are required. The studio model really helps people like that because we can help people who've got, for want of a better word, half-baked ideas and fully bake them.
Yeah.
But even better than that, there's a model that when the studio gets together, we actually generate ideas. We don't just help people develop their ideas. We can generate new concepts. Sometimes these are emergent properties of different teams of people that we bring together. Sometimes they're completely new ideas that'll emerge from research that we do in the studio. And sometimes there'll be ideas that people come to us with that we transform through the studio process into something that was probably quite different from what they originally thought about. All three of those areas are really exciting to me, especially this emergent property of bringing things together and the studio generating ideas, and of course also the research area, which I'm very involved in.
But these are like, so there's two really great aspects here you've talked. One is about the individuals themselves. I think this idea of you have to come up with the idea and then turn yourself into a business builder to bring it to fruition. That's the only way. That's
Mm,
really fascinating, I think, right? It speaks a lot to the studio where one example that just jumps out at me straight away is Dr. Gina Poe, right? She's one of the leading researchers on sleeps and genes in the world, but she's never built a technology product.
right.
But coming to the studio, you round out a team to help bring the best of her research that she has spent 20 years doing to turn it into a product that will create in that space. And she doesn't have to give up her job of her day job of running her research lab. She just brings loads of great information into a team to go and do that, right? So I think that's a really good instantiation of what
Mm,
you're saying there. And then the second point around this, these sort of three aspects of emergent ideas, generative ideas. You talk a lot about this concept of generative investment because it seems like the seed of what you're describing here. Can you just
yeah.
explain to people what is generative investment and
I so
what are the results of
Yeah,
it?
this is a term I use to mean investment that doesn't just invest in an idea, but invests in generating the idea. And in fact, even a bit further than that, the investment process itself can generate ideas. One of the most exciting parts of Nobody, and we're in the middle of this big push just now, the big crowdfunding push. People can see the crowdfunding, link at the bottom of the screen. One of the most important things about that it's not just about raising money. It's actually about crowd infusion. It's about bringing the crowd into the process. So it's not just a way of us raising cash from people so we can go off and do what we want. It's discovering what they want and enabling them to be part of the ideation process, the idea generation process. There's even parts of the certain levels of the crowdfunding where people can bring in ideas to us, and we'll workshop it and we'll work with them on that idea specifically. But everybody who invests becomes part of that engine, not just because they put cash in, but because we're actually very open to the concept of being able to generate ideas. And this particular model of investment, I call it generative investment because it enables not only new ideas to form, but this additional area where ideas can be transformed by the studio. Somebody comes to us with one concept, and this happens, frankly, almost every company
Yeah.
that we've run up already. It starts as one idea, it ends up as another, and often it ends up as two or three others as well. We generate ideas along the way, and that's one of the things that makes it so exciting.
Yeah, for me too, right? I always say you don't build a product, you build knowledge about a product.
Right.
And that's sort of part of the process, if you will, right? Your initial hunch or hypotheses is really something that you just start to test, and through that process, you learn interesting bits of new information that some that you found that you thought was true turns out to be, others doesn't,
Right.
and it sort of meanders its way through that process, right? Which should be generative and emergent, as you describe here, right? Like that's what happens. Great products emerge from the knowledge that we learn from trying to test and learn along the way, and being able
Absolutely.
to do that more and more with the studio as we have more people bringing these ideas to us, or as you're also spending time looking at areas. I think it's really important for people to hear some of your focus areas that you tend to dive into, where we have these amazing technologies that are arriving simultaneously and converging, if you will, in many aspects. And I think one of the fascinating things you do is tend to look in those areas to see those opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of the work, and how it contributes to this sort of a generative, because these are generative investments, if you will, it's your
They are
time
indeed,
that you're
yeah.
putting into it.
Well, I think what we've spoken about so far has been very much on the innovation side, and I think people will understand that there's this impulse to be innovative, but we also have to have a research side as well. And the research side is interested in, what are the broad areas of technology and development where we could, we don't necessarily have an idea in this space just now, but we could generate ideas in it. And they may be areas where there's a lot of thinking going on just now, but we're looking for that particular twist on the technology, or a particular twist on the use case. And crowd helps us to do that, because crowd enables a lot of these things. So one particular area, I would look at would be, well, I think if you look to crypto technologies just now, that's a really interesting example. I am a thorough crypto skeptic.
Yeah,
Um,
I know it's
and
great.
that makes me one of the best placed people to research this, because I'm not just starry eyed at the concept of crypto. Um, but that does also mean that I think there are some really interesting scenarios. So, what does it mean to explore those ideas that I'm skeptical about, and find the value in them? And I there's just so many of them, because crypto as a means of certification, crypto as a means of signing things, crypto as a means of sharing things in a kind of micro segmented way, is absolutely fascinating. And I have some, of course, I have some crypto that I watch, and I do some staking, and I do my fair share of hodling as well, of course. And we I'm not just playing with it, though. I'm trying to see what emerges from this space. And then, of course, one of the things about emergent and generative research is you look at something like crypto, but we're also looking at something like metaverse, and then we might also look at something like the talent booking service we have through Ovations, which is an app company that we're building. What does it look like when all three of these come together? Well, that's another whole set of things which will be generated. Another emergent set of concepts. And that's really one of the key things about research, is finding areas, first of all, that we don't really know about, um, and then finding areas that could potentially generate ideas in conjunction with other areas as we develop them. So crypto is a fairly obvious one, but there's non-obvious ones as well. Um, One area I've been kind of interested in is, well, some people are looking at things like psychedelics, and mentioned sleep research. There's a whole lot of stuff that can be done around cognition, behavior, which is now enabled by personal technologies, and can be taken much further by personal technologies than ever before, rather than dealing, for example, with a therapist or visiting a doctor. A lot of this can be moderated through applications and devices. What are these devices that are effective? What are the applications that can be built on top of them? And then what are they like when they're combined with other things that the studio does to generate another whole set of ideas? And it's just fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating, right? I think it's one of the fun parts about the studio model again. Often people have to sort of choose one idea or one path and follow it through to fruition, which can take 10, 15 years in some ideas. And along the way, like I always think it's one of the fun things when you meet early stage entrepreneurs that have built these businesses. They've got like 50 more ideas, but they'd love to work on, but they're so sort of locked in, if you will, to an idea that they had one day 10 years ago, that
Right.
they need to keep working that, right? Because people
And they have
sort of,
to be. The current model forces them
absolutely,
into that rut, and it's super frustrating. And one of the most common patterns that you see in the startup world is the founder and CEO who, after a few years, really struggles with being a business person and steps back and becomes the CTO, and a more professional business person comes in and takes over as CEO. And that's always presented as a big trauma to the company and is typically presented as a failure, when actually it's really a failure of the financial model to say, we forced this person into a role that they were completely unsuited to, or that they're not best at, and they always should have been doing that. And
yeah.
and we can completely avoid that scenario with the studio.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And then the other point I think you mentioned about, because the studio is essentially a portfolio of ideas that are independent and yet reinforce one another, it gets really fascinating then about generating ideas or businesses on top of businesses on top of businesses, which is, a simple example for us is one of our new companies, ThoughtForma, is a no-code platform, which
Right.
we obviously built Ovations on top of. And now you sort of start to get that benefit where now we could start to even build whole concepts where there might be opportunities to build businesses similar to innovations or content businesses on much faster, because we've already done that. And then
Right.
there's
And
chances when we start to plug new technologies in on top of this, our new businesses that we might create are going to join our portfolio, that they can start to bake themselves into that process and create other businesses even faster. So it's really fascinating as you start to build up these portfolios of companies and how they're collaborating with one another rather than competing with one another,
yeah,
and actually
it
being genesis for more ideas to start to flow from.
well, it's exciting, and it's a hotbed of innovation. It generates innovation, but it's also very efficient and very practical. And I think we should overlook that. We could talk about all the kind of cool, exciting research and innovation stuff, but it's also very practical. You look at ThoughtForma. So there's a low code, no code platform, and we've used it to build the Ovations application, an Ovations service, which now becomes its own company. But we also built a billing service for Ovations, because Ovations has to charge money. And now we've got a billing service. No company that we build, again, ever needs to reinvent the billing service. It already exists. And those building blocks can be reused. And that's extremely efficient, because people don't need to come to us and say, well, I've got this idea, but I've got all this other stuff I've got to do. I've got to onboard people. I've got to do billing. I've got to build a community around it. Yeah, we know how to do that. We have these building blocks ready to go. Focus on your idea, and focus only on your idea, and we'll make it happen for you.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. All right,
It
so we're
is.
starting to get a bunch of questions fly in here. So it's always nice to take a couple of these, Donald. So one
So
of the
long as they
questions,
don't start with why.
yeah, no, we're pretty safe so far. So I'll just bring a few of these up and we can talk about them. So Christine Mudd is saying it's really exciting to think about learnings across the portfolio and opportunities, collaboration for business ecosystems too as well. Do you want to just share a little bit more around, our thinking around that? You mentioned building blocks, which is a little bit of an internal term. Maybe could you define a little bit what building blocks is for the studio and how it supports more of the ideas that we're bringing to market?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think of building blocks not as a component in the sense of something which is completely self-contained, and not as a module. Some people, I think, will be tempted to think of them as components or modules, but they're really services that we have developed, that we know how to reuse the knowledge of, and we know how to kind of rewire them into new systems. And if you think of a business ecosystem, a great deal of a business ecosystem is actually pretty well established stuff people already understand. Most businesses have exactly the same sort of problems that they have to deal with, whether it's on hiring and onboarding, it's finance, it's all those things which are repeated again and again. And being able to rewire these in new ways And it's the new ways that matter. Not just we don't just need to rewire them in the same way for every company, but we can rewire them in new ways and imagine new possibilities. And especially if you then start to sort of think about what does this mean if we're talking about a payment service. But yeah, we're also crypto enabled, and we're also crowd enabled. What does that mean for the payment services of any company that we build? Well, you know what? We don't need to reimagine it. We just need to rewire it because we've already done a lot of that work and a lot of that thinking. And that's one of the reasons why I call this generative. And you're right. Business ecosystem is a big part of that, but B2C is a huge part of this as well. Customers are often very underserved in these areas with new technologies.
Yeah. Now we've another great question here from Tahir. So, if someone is the CEO of one of the companies you invest in, but then you find out they aren't the best fit to run the company, how do you migrate that or help that person transition to another role? And what does that look like? So this is another great question, I think, which our answer to is yes. That's actually one of the superpowers of a studio is, finding out leaders and their preference and their skills is also an emergent property. Sometimes on startups, actually, I would say it's one of the most emergent properties of a startup is some people surprise you, step up and take roles and do things you never anticipated, but other people recognize, I think, that part of the journey is like, I was great at this part of the company, it needs something else now. I think there's great humility with that. And one of the things that Tahir, because of our portfolio, is we actually welcome that. Like there's no penalty for realizing that you need to be in a different company or the business has evolved in a way that you're no longer the right person to be playing that role. It's actually welcomed. Again, you're just, the opportunity presents itself where if there's another idea that you have formed or another company that you want to go and found, you just go back to the beginning and straight back into the ideation lab, and then we see how far we can take the next idea that comes. So I think that's really important, though, Donald. You talked a little bit,
Yeah.
this can be perceived as failure, if you will, of individuals or companies in other contexts. Yet in the studio, it's actually a welcomed sort of
Exactly. The failure is not to recognize it. The failure is to force someone into a role, or the other way around. The failure is to cling to a role because you've got your ego invested in it. And both of those are the only kind of failures I think that would arise, because the success is finding people in the right role. And when we talk about humility, there's also a certain amount of humility which comes from ideation, which comes from, we have a concept, but I'm not tied to it. It's not my idea. It's our idea. It's a shared generative studio idea, rather than I'm the one who's got that and I'm going to pick up that ball and run with it. It's one thing to take ownership. That's different, as opposed to, kind of clinging and grasping to something. It's not your precious, it's your idea.
Yeah. So, look, it's fantastic to have you on the show today. It's, whenever I spend time with you, I feel like we could just talk for hours about this stuff. The joy for the listeners here today is that we have an announcement in itself that you're actually going to run a show on our live streams, the bi-weekly show, to dive into some of the topics of research and innovation, which I highly recommend everybody subscribe on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, however you're listening to us, Starlink, you choose your path. Donald, do you want to share a little bit about your inspiration for what the show will focus on and why people should listen in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a lot of fun. But I've said that ideas are very much kind of two-way process for us. We're very serious about ideas being generated by the crowd and from within the studio. So research and innovation kind of show will work on what are the areas that we're working in research, and what ideas can people come to us with, and in particular, take an area like crypto. What are we seeing, but also what are people doing in the real world that we perhaps don't know about? What unusual use cases do people have? What kind of weird and wonderful things are they doing in their work, and see what emerges from that. So my dream, if you like, for this show is that the show generates ideas in the process of the show. I think that would be kind of very cool. I have this kind of dream that an idea will come up in the process of the show that becomes a product, becomes a company at some point, and I'd love to see that happening.
Well, I'm looking forward to watching it. I think it's a great addition to the portfolio of shows that we've created, whether you're listening to Min and Kiara in the Idea Lab, Donald on Research and Innovation. We've Dr. Eric talking about peak performance and for individuals. The shows just seem to keep growing. We've great Inside Nobody shows. We're going to have Seychelles, our Chief Culture Officer, share ideas around that. So you're literally going to be inundated with Nobody Studios insights and powered by the crowd. So if you're interested to be on any of these shows to contribute, please reach out to any of us at Nobody and share your idea about what you'd like to contribute. Don't forget, we're right in the middle of our crowdfunding at the moment, where this is your chance to sort of own a piece of Nobody Studios, if you will. So one investment will give you many companies that you can be part of. Go to republic/nobodystudios.com and join us there. Donald, as ever, it's been fantastic to chat. I'm going to be tuning into your show, guaranteed. I look forward to sharing it in the weeks ahead. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.